Good morning, everyone. The clock says 9:31, so let's get started. I want to offer a welcome to our folks joining us through the live stream. Glad that you are joining us for this second session celebrating our 40th wedding anniversary. I've got wedding on the mind. Our 40th anniversary of Faith Lutheran Church. We're trying to get our presidents organized here. There we go. We good? All right, good. Those of you who weren't able to be here last week, we had a tremendous start by hearing the stories and reflections of our charter members of Faith Lutheran Church. And now we get to hear from our esteemed leaders, the former presidents of the congregation. Thought this would be an opportunity just to hear their reflections about the era in which they served. Some have done, just incredible homework and asking access to the archives downstairs. And the rest of you, what have you got? Anyway, I'm thrilled. And before we go any further, just in case we run out of time at the end, I want to make sure we give our thanks and appreciation for those who stepped up and heard God's call to serve as leaders in this way, as presidents of the congregation. Thank you to all of you. Thank you, thank you. So we have a microphone for each side here. If you all don't know, they're pretty chronological in their reign as presidents. And so what I would love to do is just start on the end for the first question. First question is this: as you think about the era in which you served on council, what stands out as the highlights, both joys and challenges? You can be thinking about staffing and programs and outreach and the issues that councils focused on at the time. So if I could invite you to just be fairly brief, but just think about what comes to mind as those joys and challenges of which the time that you served. So we're going to have you all just pack them. So a name and the year that you served would be great.
I'm Jim Covey, and I don't have any idea what year I served. I know it was the early 90s. Pastor Trost was relatively new. You hold this. Sure. Pardon my shaking, it's little Parkinson's going on here. Kayla was fairly new in the office. Eric Knapp was the music director. That was going gangbusters. Of course, the building was new at that time, and relatively stable staff. We did start the Saturday night services during my time in office, as I remember it. But other than that, it was kind of chugging along and doing the business, and lots and lots of congregational meetings about the building and paying the bills and calling people and working with it. So that's about the best I can do for you with the memory I've got left.
Thank you.
I was fortunate enough. My name is Jack Oley. Thanks, Betty. Well, this is really a fun thing. I had a chance to read through some of the materials that Pastor had shared with me, and it's hard to believe that all these years have passed. Chris and I came here in 1988, and I was then senior vice president at Drake University. And so I have to say that Mike Marty was the person that made it possible for us to be here. And I say that because I was the new guy at Drake. And he said to me for one of the services, he said, I think you're Lutheran. And I said, yes. He said, well, I've got a good place for you to come. So we came, he brought me in. Chris was still back with the boys in Nebraska. And that was the start of it all. And so Mike and Shirley were just amazing and did so much for us. And I want to remember both of them today. My opportunity in 1990, when I became head of or chair of the church, was something that was more than I could even imagine. Pastor Trost had just come earlier. When did he actually? In 80, he came in 87 probably. And Pastor Trost supported the understanding of the critical things of growing pains. And we all worked with him, working hard to dream dreams. We held a building pledge campaign. Most of all, you remember it, those of us that were sitting here when we had that. And the great thing was, we never knew, but we had faith that we would be able to build this facility. When Chris and I came, there was just that little place out there. There was no building here at all. And we had an opportunity to think big. And I think Pastor Trost was one who did all that for us. He was able to think out of the box. And he was the best speaker I had heard. He never had a note and never missed a word. That's what the council really, at that time, in the early 90s, late 80s, how important that was to all of us. So Bob Shaw followed me, and I don't think Bob's going to be able to be here today. But I want to commend him too, because he was very instrumental. Bob and I were there, either fortunately or unfortunately, to help with building a way to help people think about thinking bigger financially. And that was my job at Drake. So it was very easy for me to think about what needed to be done. And we had a great time. We never knew whether we'd make it, but we did. So my opportunity to be part of this organization is really very special. You know, Chris and I then had to leave because we went to Wartburg. We had a wonderful time. It was just wonderful. And so those are the times that I remember most.
Hello, my name's Larry Hoyer. My wife and I are both past presidents of this great body. I was president in 1994 and 95, worked with Pastor Trost. Our big objective at that time was a long-range plan that we had started. Miff Groth, I followed, had started a session on that. I think Karen and Jim Covey hold the record for congregational meetings. Karen was on the building committee, they were both on the council, and we were merging, and we had to call a new pastor, and I could go on, but they had a lot of reasons for a lot of meetings. And Karen was always appreciative of you, Jim. We had a membership of around 1,600. We were going through growing sessions, and that's when we were just starting the Saturday night group. The thing I'm most proud of the goal we had set as a congregation at that time. It was our 10-year anniversary. And we pledged and raised $10,000 to start new mission congregations. And we had a lot of debt and problems ourselves, but we made it. And that's what I was proud of. It told me a little bit about what we're really about.
I'm Steve Hamilton. I followed Larry. He reminded me that I called him at home and asked him a lot of questions about what it was like to be the council president. Although it's a long time ago, 30 years or so, I remember it just like it was 60 years ago. Unlike what Jim described as a period of stability, my era was not that. Pastor Cruz had left, had moved on, taken another call, and then Pastor Trost had moved on. So actually this congregation was without a pastor for a long time. I don't remember how long it was, but it could have been a year. It was a long time. And finally, we did get a interim pastor from St. Paul. I think his name was Schultz. Just a delightful human being, and helped settle the dust, because there was some concern here. Moving forward, what's going to happen to this congregation without any real leadership, professional leadership? But as it turned out, with the help of the call committee, I'm pretty sure it was either Becky or Bob Shaw, one of the others, helped us. Dan Dickman ended up receiving a call, and things took off again. Is that right? Yeah. And so things took off. There was more stability. Personally, during that period, what I didn't know is, you remember, you go through the vice president and then president. What I didn't know before I became president was that I was going to take on some different responsibilities at work at Principal Financial Group, and I became responsible for Asian operations. So I was back and forth between Asia, sometimes twice a month during this period. So I was an absentee president too some of that time. So that's one thing that sticks in my mind. We survived. We were stronger for it, and ended up moving ahead. So Ray, you're next. I'm not sure chronologically you're next, but you're next from the people here.
Thanks, Steve. I was in the early 2000s, and I was here as...
Name.
I'm Ray Hayes, and I followed Julie Thorson and Julie Hart, and then I was lucky enough to talk Jim Hessman into being my VP, and Jim's not here today, I don't believe, but so I was surrounded by really good presidents, and I was there during the transition from Trost to Dickman, and I believe Pastor Dickman was his first year was my year as president, as I recall. And Jack Oley, during the 90s, if you weren't around during the 90s here, I think of Jack Oley leading us in our fundraising. It seems like every year, and Jack could get us access to a room down at Drake University that had a bank of phones. And we would recruit our members, and we would go down there in the freezing cold at night and hit the phone banks for our annual fundraising. And we'd also coordinate every member visits from there. But my memories go way back when I got married. We were on a walk out here in the neighborhood before this church really existed. And there was some of you may remember there was a barn next door that had a bunch of sheep. So we're on a walk, and some guy walks by us and he stops and asks us where we live and who we were, and Who remembers the name of the first pastor at Advent Church? Ron? Ron Lundeen. So Ron Lundeen lived over in the neighborhood over here, and he stopped Sherry and I, and we became members of this church because of that. When I was president, I remember a lot of personnel stuff, the transition of the pastors, and it seems like all the jobs were transitioning, education, music, and it was a ton of work. I remember when I became president, the council meetings tended to go a little long, and one night we were here, and the phone rings in the church office, and somebody answered the phone, and they came back into the council meeting room and said, it was about 10:15 at night here, by the way, and the phone had rang, and somebody answers the phone and comes in and says, "Ray, your wife Sherry called. She just wondered where you were." So I think after that, we tried to cut our council meetings to stop at 9 o'clock. But so many great memories here. All three of my boys went through education here, and I'm so thankful for that, and thankful that I was able to be a small part of that. So,
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lynette Sorensen, and I served, Jerry Wage has kindly reminded me, 2005 as council president. I was sandwiched between two Jerrys, Jerry Witt and Jerry Wage, and they taught me a lot. I was kind of, it's one of those things you're tapped on the shoulder. I think it's your turn, right, to do this? So I reluctantly agreed. I know that Pastor Dickman, I had just gotten off of heading up VBS, and he said, "I think you can do this too," so I did it. Unfortunately, my memory does not serve me very well of many of the events, but one of the things that I do remember, one of the significant things, was the ordination of Pastor Diana during my term, because we were searching for a full-time associate pastor, and so I remember that being something that we were able to do. And it was a joy to serve that, and actually in all of the roles that we've done around here at Faith. John and I have been members for a very long time, so I appreciated the opportunity and to be able to do that.
I'm Jerry Wage, now known around here as, instead of President Jerry, it's now Chef Jerry. So that shows where you can go from one end to the other, perhaps. So I think I have the distinction of being president twice, back to back. And then because of that, I also had the distinction of starting the change of the Constitution process. So we had an absence of an incoming VP that was unable to hold the position, and Lance Noe was coming in, and we wanted to maximize his time, so Pastor Dave says, "What do you think about serving twice back to back as president?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, can I?" And so we looked at the Constitution, which our founders had created, and where they had come up with many solutions. This was not one of those, what happens if the vice president says they don't want the position anymore. So that was a fun distinction, and then getting the Constitution changed. And then we started the expansion process. And so a lot of people had really good ideas, and they wanted to use my name and face to get me out there and to attempt to raise money. So we bought the 2 duplexes north of the Gathering House when I was president, and then we started the expansion process. So then I too was going to meeting after meeting, and in meetings with people with architecture and whatnot that I had no clue what was going on other than making sure the process was still moving along. And as Lance, not that I ever forget this, but Lance brought it up as a point. So we are actually here at Faith because of Jack Oley and Kayla Zanoni, because Jill was going to do a story on the new church architecture that was taking place out in this region. And so Jill called Kayla. Kayla says, "Oh, Jill, you need to talk to Jack Oley. He's vice president over at Drake." And Jill interviewed Jack, did the story. This is where we started coming. And then Jill and I were the very first wedding with the Dobson organ, because Jill kept pestering Dean Marty, who we both knew from Drake, and is it going to be done? Is it going to be done? It should be. It should be. And I was telling Lance, each week he'd come in and there were 5 less pieces on the ground because it was all laid out up here. So that was pretty much, and then we went on to the capital campaign. And now we have the expansion through to everybody's efforts and, again, constant giving over the years. So.
I'm Lance Noy, and part of that group of people during that era where the big project was the addition. And so I looked through my files this morning. I got up to look at my faith file folder, and there was 750 documents in there of different PowerPoints and PDFs and Word documents. And then I was telling Mike that, bragging up the amount of volume of work I did. And how many emails did you have from something incredible? Yeah, thousands of emails and all the work that Mike did. So there was a group of us, and it kind of all runs together for me. And different campaigns, a Faith Forward campaign, then a Renew campaign, and then another campaign, and I think we got out of the saddlebag business. Do you remember the saddlebag business? Yeah, I think we transitioned out of that. I'll tell one anecdote, and that is we were all great with the project, got everything going, and then there was a parking problem. And that's the city of Clive required us to have many more parking spaces if we increase the square footage. Well, I teach public administration at Drake, so I'm going to work with these government people and get this sorted out. And submitted the paperwork, and we got rejected. So, well, we can appeal at one of the zoning meetings. So I shamelessly, I was involved in part of this, we shamelessly decided to send a whole bunch of members to the meeting. And we made sure to have people with kids. We even had a couple of people who were pregnant there. I mean, it was, we basically shamed them into giving us a waiver. So that's my proudest moment, is that.
Thank you, Lance. My name is Jane Turner, and I was president in 2008 to 2009. And I was lucky enough to be president when we opened our new edition. One of the memories that I had was to commemorate or to celebrate opening that. I wanted to serve champagne. And I had to get approval from the council. So we got approval, and probably, I don't know if this is true, but we did serve champagne to celebrate that the opening of that new space. Yeah, you know, what Jerry said and what Lance said, I was at that zoning meeting. I'm an accountant. I don't know these things, but we got her done, and it's thanks to everyone in this congregation. The other memory that I have is quite a personal one. I can remember in July of 2008, I was at the lectern. We were either approving a budget or approving a new slate of council members, and our daughter's softball game had been rained out the day before. And so I turned the meeting over to Mike really quickly, and I rushed off to Fort Dodge, and they won. We had some staff transitions during my term, and yeah, Heather can talk about that. Otherwise, thank you very much for the privilege of being your council president. You're up.
Hey, Heather. You mind if I jump in real quick? So, sorry, I'm double dubiting. Mike Gall, I was president right after Jane, and anytime Laura, her daughter, called, the Olympic anthem played on your phone. So maybe a couple memories. So my memories, I was treasurer, vice president, president, all the memories kind of flow together. I remember a conference call that Jerry and Lance and I had probably around 2008, and we had done the capital campaign. We didn't achieve the goal we'd expected, and the Great Recession was on the horizon. We could see it. The question was, do we defer this or do we go? And ultimately, obviously, we made the decision to go. And so that was not a bad decision at all. The other thing I remember is 2009, I believe, was when the ELCA put out the statement on human sexuality. There was a lot of concern, question, wanting to have a congregational meeting, wanting to have a vote. I remember Jim saying last week the best way to split a congregation is to have a vote. And so Pastor Dave and I made the decision not to address it in a congregational vote meeting and address it more in individual conversations. Again, I don't know if that was the right decision or not, but it was the decision that we made at the time.
I'm Heather Miller. I believe I served in 2011. It's all somewhat of a blur. But in reflecting on today, I pulled up my annual report to the congregation. It was entitled The Year of Transition. And that was somewhat appropriate at the time because, if you don't recall, during my year, both pastoral roles, the director of music ministry, the faith feast coordinator, all vacated during my year, and so I can look back on that era now fondly, and because it's been a long time, and it was just because of the sheer dedication, not only of our staff. Suddenly, I was running staff meetings here, not qualified at all to do that, but it's an experience. And we had a tremendous staff that really was dedicated. We had a wonderful council that really pulled together, because that could have fractured this church in a massive way that no one wanted. And then our congregational members. Grace groups started up about that period, which really allowed a connectivity with among our congregational members, which allowed us to stay together, pull together, and renew. Marv Johnson was call committee chair during that period, which gave us forward-looking insight and hope for the future, which was wonderful as well. Pastor Eric, you preached on Star Words, a couple of Star Word, and my word for this year is resilience. But I would say that was also fitting as I was reflecting on this as well for our congregation, because the resilience that all of our congregational members, staff, and council members all showed got us to where we are today. So thank you.
Suzanne Minnick, and I had the privilege of serving as president in 2013. I started by somehow Marv Johnson and Heather Miller asked me to serve on the call committee, so that was kind of my entrance. And then I was vice chair. And I had the privilege of being part of the welcoming of Pastor Randy. So served on the call committee to call him, and then stepped in on council to welcome him and set footings, and then oversee the call committee that called Pastor Sarah. So there was a lot of renewal, I think would be the word, if I was going to stick with Heather's and identify a word, renewal and coming together and opening hearts again would be a lot of what I experienced. And then if there was anything not quite right, they're not members here anymore, but Ann and Jay Fogarty. So Ann and I tend to look quite a lot alike. And so she ended up getting a lot of the questions and kept having to say, I am not Suzanne. So that was maybe my blessing, is that Ann would get cornered if there was a question, and I would just somehow and not get any of that dialogue. But it was a true honor and pleasure, and had the opportunity to get to know so many more people in our congregation in that role. And Ryan York was before me.
Good morning, I'm John Sorensen. I was president in 2015 and 2016. I just follow my wife, whatever she does. I try and emulate. I was preceded by Sharon Opland, Sharon Sorensen Opland, I will have you know, part of the Danish mafia at the time, and then John Buns, but I see Judy Acree, and I think Hope Johnson and others were on the council when I was there. When you think about the joy of doing this, it's the people you get to work with, people rallying around part of a church and a community that you've been a part of for 4 years. So that is truly the best part of this whole gig, and I would encourage you, anyone who is thinking about leadership, it's worth it. It's really worth it. A lot of our time was spent on property. If I recall correctly, we were part of the capital campaign in finishing out the church, adding classrooms, the music rooms, St. Michael's, adding a new parking lot, expanded parking lot. I know this because Don Beck was a part of almost every meeting. So if you dealt with property at the time, Don was basically the guy I went to for everything that we did, and he kept me informed as council president. So I can't thank Don enough for that role he played. But it turned out great. I think the church expansion went well. The fundraising aspect went well, and people tend to step up when needed. So it was a great experience.
Hi there, I'm Chad Thompson. I was president from 2018 to 2019, just shortly after John had left. John Buns was my vice president. And probably to echo, and it's kind of one of those things, hopefully a lot of you probably still remember all of this. But to kind of echo, I mean, Heather, why didn't we talk about this? Because suddenly, so my role was also a lot of transition. When I first became vice president, first meeting, Pastor Sarah resigned. We spent most of that year going through the idea of, what does this role of associate pastor mean? What are the staff going to do? What should we do different in a certain way? We went through about a year of those kinds of meetings, and then that fall, Pastor Randy resigned. And much like Heather, pretty soon I found myself running staff meetings, which again, just like Heather, not prepared for something like that. So we're in the middle of running staff meetings. We were fortunate that when we were without leadership, we had already been through a year's worth of conversation about what does pastoral leadership look like? Should the staff look like? How should this go? What changes should we make? Unfortunately, in the middle of all of that, I think we had been through kind of these periods of transition, change, expansion. It felt like in the beginning that the congregation as a whole had just kind of, we're tired. It was just the feeling. It led to some really tough financial times. There were some of these staff meetings where, we had I'll just say we had a lot of good talks. If somebody wants to hear the stories about that one, please do. I was asked to keep it short, so I'll keep it short. But as it goes, I think the thing that was always a joy, all of these struggles that happen, all of these meetings, getting the staff together, coming up with some really creative ideas. There was kind of this idea of the staff at the time was, we're going through these transitions. Nobody was quite sure of what they could do, but I had to encourage a lot of them, saying, hey, if you've got an idea, let's do it. Let's try something, do something new. Whatever that might be, let's go for it. So there's a lot of things that happen. Even very simple things like that little children's area that's kind of out in the commons was something that Andrea and Erica came up with that they thought was important to bring children kind of back into the service per se. So they put that together. I think the things that were kind of the joys about this is the way that the congregation responded to being asked. I know I had lots of conversations with people about what does this mean? What does all the support mean? The financial support, the personnel, the people that showed up. I am still floored at in the middle of all of this. We had no senior pastoral leadership. Pastor Bonnie was here as an intern. We had kind of set up what Christmas Eve services were going to look like. So my family and I showed up for the 5 o'clock service here a little bit early, just after the early 3 o'clock service they did. Casey comes up to me and says, "Did you hear what happened?" And of course I'm in panic. I'm like, "Oh no, what happened?" And he says, "So many people showed up, we ran out of chairs. We had people standing in the back just to be part of this." And again, I think of that, then when we went through the call process, we ended up calling Pastor Eric. The meeting that we held to have that vote filled the room. People showed up. And it was, just that morning was just the church buzzed. There was so much energy. People responded, in such that positive way. And through all of this, I think, going back to last week when everybody was talking about the founding of the church, and I hear everybody talking about this morning, I remember my own experience as a teenager growing up at a small church that went through congregational conflict, and how that impacted people, how that hurt people. The one thing when I was president and we're doing all of these things, I never ever had anybody walk up to me and say, this is not the way we've always done this. I got nothing but support from this congregation, and how rare that is, and just how that, how open everyone was to be willing to change, do something new, try something, do something different, be something different. I think is something that I am grateful. I've been here for about 20 years now. I am grateful to this congregation for that kind of support. Just know it doesn't exist everywhere. It's a tough thing. And I'll always be grateful for this, for the prayers, the conversations, the support of my family through all of that time, spending that time doing staff meetings, things like that. It's been 7 years, but I will still get emotional about some of these things. It's kind of hard to be past that. So thank you. And by the way, I always kind of say, if anybody had any problems, it's always Hope's fault, because she's the one that got me into this.
Beautiful. Hi, I'm Becky Lockenmeyer. I was president in 22. Nathan Boonstra was president before me, who's not here today. And when he asked me to be vice president, I thought, I do not know if I am qualified to do this, but I trust him because he's a friend of mine. And then, as usual, God has a plan, because March 2020 hit, and we found it was pretty fortuitous to have 2 physicians on church council at that point in time. But COVID was obviously huge during that time, but it was also, Pastor Eric had literally just started. And so we were really focused on how do we support him and how do we get through this really tumultuous time as a congregation. And it was really weird. It was just not normal, and it was not how we should operate normally. And so it was very different. But what I remember during that time when I was on council was we had literally the best council. I had the best treasurer in the world, and when Jane agreed to stay on, I was like, oh, thank you, God. And we had an amazing call committee working on calling another pastor. Lori Pulitzer headed that committee, and they were just phenomenal. And so it was just such a good group. That's what I remember most about being on council, was all of the great people that I got to work with, and to meet, just know all of the people on all the committees that are taking care of things was just amazing. And so just appreciated that so much. And I appreciated how much I learned about what happens just in the nuts and bolts of things going on, and all of the things and the support, just like Chad said, about this congregation supporting each other. So it was a fantastic experience, and I really appreciated it. So.
Good morning, I'm Dan Dickman. I am the most recent past president, so I served from 23 to 24. One of the larger things that we focused on for council was the mission, purpose, and core values discussions. Pastor Eric led 50, 60, 70 sessions. I don't know what it felt like by the time we were done. But had a lot of discussions. We're kind of returning to normalcy, I would say, post-COVID. It was kind of a general theme from that time. And so we spent a lot of time talking about who we are, what we believe, and how that might translate in the congregation's foundation in the future as well and what we do. I think we discovered that there are a great many things we share in beliefs, especially a lot of the what, a lot of the how. Perhaps we have some very different ideas as well, but I think we melded those things well into some documentation that serves hopefully as a good guide in the future. There were also a couple wonderful task forces that worked on projects while I was on council. Can't claim credit for any of their work, but we kind of oversaw some things. Columbarium Committee was one of them. Installed our wonderful columbarium outside, and then also finding a new director of music ministries as well, because Dr. Dave had retired, or not retired, but had accepted the position in Idaho shortly before that as well. So those were some of the larger things. We also did go through, and I don't recall if we started this in Becky's term or mine, but we went through and kind of cleaned up some of the membership roster. We showed, I think, low 2,000 some members, and we knew that that was not accurate. We ended up going back and refining, and I think we found out we had 1,240 something in reality, but kind of trying to get things back from an administrative perspective to where we could proceed appropriately with a lot of things. Wonderful council, wonderful support from all kinds of folks.
We had 4 other questions for this group prepared, but this was the best way to spend this time. I'm so grateful for the stories and reflections that you all came prepared with today and gave us a really nice snapshot of the work that this congregation has been through, from major building additions, including the Dobson organ, and to go through 3 major building transitions like that, expansions in the 40 years. That's a lot for a congregation, and we are still experiencing the incredible benefits and the gifts of your leadership and the work of this congregation throughout that time. We have 2 minutes left. What I would love to do is just to end with a little bit more celebration on the rest of you and the presidents, if there are other specific times that come into mind about the strength of this congregation and how it moved us to the next era. What comes to mind for those of you who have been around?
Yeah, pardon me, but I think one of the significant omissions in many of the president's talk was paying deference to Kayla. I doubt that there was any single layperson more important to the life and sustenance of this congregation than Kayla was. And I wonder if some of the presidents could share thoughts about how they had to take control of the church away from Kayla.
Any response to Herb's question?
I can't leave today without saying, in those early years, Koinonia groups were amazing.
Mm-hmm.
They were something that was very important to all of us. And today, some of those people that were in our Koinonia group are still our closest friends.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked today about the elected leadership of the congregation. There's always those people that year in and year out are the glue that hold it together. And one of those people is Ron Nielsen. He has been here for years and years, served on committee after committee and function after function. And Ron, thank you.
Any other just quick reflections on the strengths of this congregation over 40 years?
I'd comment just on one other thing that I think has become a great strength that wasn't mentioned earlier, is Seeds of Faith as well. I'd like to thank everyone who's involved in the development of that, and I think that's been a wonderful mission as well for the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that. Development of Seeds of Faith, and that was during the Dennis Dickman era, right? That's right, yes. Did you? Great, yeah. Jim Hesseman, who's not feeling great today, otherwise he would be here, But that was in his era as leadership. Yes.
And the youth ministries, because those are outstanding. We've had outstanding leadership, and if they hear this message, they should take a bow.
Very good, very good.
Just on Kayla again, I've never known a person that could answer a phone and not even have to ask their name. She knew everybody's name just by how they called in. Never had to say, who is this, or you never had to announce yourself. She knew everybody. It was remarkable to me.
Very good. Well, obviously the stories go on, and they will. We've got a wonderful future in store for us, and we're going to build off of this incredible foundation. So with that, the Lord be with you all. Good and gracious God, we give you thanks for this day of worship, but especially we thank you for this sacred time together. Once again, hearing precious stories about the history of your church here in this place and in this time. We thank you for the leadership, whether they were the presidents or members of council or people just doing the work in all sorts of ways as we worship and as we grow in our faith together and as we serve your people. It's what it's all about. And so I, once again, give you thanks for all the ways that people have served this congregation. So inspire us, bless us into the future, and grant us your grace as we move forward. In Jesus' name, amen. Next week, we're going to be back in St. Michael's Hall around tables, and we're going to talk about what is the last 40 years going to help us do in the future. So come be part of that conversation. Thanks, everybody, and thanks, presidents.